Here we are back on the motor. We'll start the video here and saying that the end results come out very positive. What I'm doing here is necessary, but it wasn't the root cause of the problem. More on that later. I think at this point I've used some magic marker and marked the radius. The area that I'm working on here is where the 1-inch chunk of the main cap had wedged between the block and the crankshaft on the other motor when it exploded, and it put a pretty good whap right there on the journal, which distorted the metal and made it fat right there. So I've got a fine file, put a little tape underneath to protect the radius, and filing down the high spots. At this point I changed it because the magic marker wasn't working well, and I put some actual machinist dye on it. And I hooked 2 used rods I had from the other motor so I'm not messing with the new ones, and applying pressure, trying to wear off the machinist dye so I can see where the high spots are. And I'm going slow, using the feeler gauge to see how my progress is going, taking my time. Unfortunately, this is a little bit like woodworking. Once you cut it off or file it off, you got what you got. You can't just weld on more. So trying to go easy, not only seeing what the numbers are, but also just getting a feel for what's going on, trying to get a picture in my head on what I need to do. Now, don't poke fun at my little brass hammer. I've used this thing since the late 70s, building my stock car engines. One of the changes I did is I did put a longer bolt through it. I could put a handle on it, but to tell you the truth, I've gotten so used to the feel that I think it would be awkward if I had it to where it was a rigid handle and didn't move around. The engine builder, as we'll go into later, gave us a bit of a chuckle when I took all my tools over to him so we can inspect the motor a little bit. I'm trying to show on this the high spot that is worn through the blue machinist dye. This is a really inexpensive camera that I use for my videos, so you got to kind of bear with me. It doesn't do a bad job, and I think right about here you can see the shiny spots. That's where it's worn through the dye, and that's where I need to do some more dress filing. I kind of had a moment where I came up with an idea. This is some 400 grit sandpaper that I actually had bought to sand the body when I was doing the body works, sanding the feather fill, getting it. It's a wet or dry paper, but it's adhesive. So I've drawn an outline of the rod, big journal, cut it out. I'm going to clean the rod up real nice so it'll stick, and then we'll use this to hone the edges of the radius down and try to make everything fit in an almost machinist manner. Once again, I've attached both of the used rods back onto the journal and checking the fit. And this is giving me some idea how much progress I've made. So here I've already done the sandpaper on just a half of the journal, and I've since cut out another piece, and I've got the whole journal top and bottom with a piece of the 400 on it, and honing the radius area with the 400 sandpaper, hoping to get things where it needs to be. Now I'm going to get the rod off, take a look at the area, see if I've worn all the dye off, which will mean everything is nice and straight. And here you can see the sandpaper that I've attached to the rod end. And after inspecting, I felt like it needed a little more. And by putting the other rod on the journal, this will help to keep everything parallel. And with these two used rods on, everything is looking pretty good. I've got somewhere between, well, it looked like 15 was the minimum and up to 19 thousandths. The other journals had 20 to 22. Back from my visit to the machine shop, or engine builder, I guess I should say. It definitely was good news. I don't have to buy a crankshaft. It's a bit humbling though, because it looks like the issue was all my fault. This being a stroker crank, they have to put a large radius on the journals to keep the stress razor down. You can see here they're nice and straight. There's a big curve. Well, that big curve kind of cuts into the distance allowed for the bearing. Hence, I don't know if this will come up, my camera is not good enough that I can read it, but on this bearing, this half says lower, correspondingly the other half says upper. And a normal, even a normal 400 small block Chevy, the bearing halves are the same. It doesn't matter top or bottom. So I just threw them in there. Well, it just randomly be that the set of rods on this end I got right, and on this end I got one right and one wrong. Well, by having that taper, basically that meant that the bearing stuck over too far this way a little bit. Hence, that took up all the side play and caused a problem. So all's better, and being properly humbled. And the engine builder did tell me about it, along with gobs of other information, and apparently I just got sensory overload, and that little tidbit slipped my mind. So I'm properly humbled. The motor's going together well, and we'll get on to the next step. Coming up, I've got a short video on the sanding of the paint for the nose. So as soon as I get the motor assembled, and I do think I'm going to take and borrow a friend of mine's run stand and put it on and fire it up, make sure there's no leaks, make sure I got oil pressure before I set it in. So that should give me some time to buff the car. So once again, thanks for watching. Cobra version 2.0 is moving forward once again. This is the final sanding with 3000 grit sandpaper. I have already sanded it with 1000 grit, and then I went to 1500 grit, and then 2000 grit to come up with this final with the 3000 grit. So these little few minutes of sanding represents the entire day's work. But this is what it takes to get a really outstanding paint job. I've sanded all the orange peel out of it, sanded those few little imperfections, any dirt that may have gotten in it. And then once I get this part done, we'll get into the compounds, and I'll most likely be compounding it 3 times. You have a coarse compound, a fine compound, and then something they kind of call a glaze, but you do run over it with the buffer. I've gone in here with the 3000 grit paper by hand in the curves. The amount of clear that I've got on it from this strip is just about 2 coats almost. So 1 fast coat and then 1 heavy coat. But I've already had 5 coats of clear on the car before I did this, so I didn't want to get too much buildup. As I go along, I see even after this being the 4th time of going over the car, I still found areas that were missed, so now's the time to take care of them. So the next video, we'll be putting the lifters and heads on, degraying the cam, button up the motor, and get it ready for the engine stand. So once again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you the next one.